Good to have you on SpaceX Daily, Episode 11, coming to you from Vancouver. It's June 22nd, 2026. Plenty moving across Starship, Falcon, and Starlink today. A 2022 geomagnetic storm that destroyed 40 Starlink satellites is now informing how the constellation hardens against atmospheric drag as launch rates climb. In February 2022, a geomagnetic storm so minor it barely rated a mention thickened the upper atmosphere just enough to drag 40 of SpaceX freshly launched Starlink satellites back to a fiery death. The event showed how even modest solar activity can raise thermospheric density enough to increase drag on satellites at 200 to 300 kilometers altitude. Starlink satellites were still in their initial low parking orbits when the storm hit, leaving insufficient margin for orbit-raising burns. Operators have since added automated drag compensation logic and raised initial insertion altitudes on later missions. Last covered on Episode 10, Starlink's direct-to-cell and subscriber growth questions now gain another data point on how the constellation maintains plane spacing when solar activity spikes. The U.S. Space Force is shifting additional protected communications traffic onto Starshield platforms after early operational demonstrations. Starshield uses the same flat panel phased array architecture as commercial Starlink, but adds radiation-hardened processors and encrypted crosslinks. The move expands the military user base beyond initial test units and ties into broader, resilient SATCOM architecture goals. Reports indicate the transition follows successful early demonstrations that validated the platform under operational conditions. Space Daily noted that Starshield maintains the core antenna design while incorporating the specialized components required for military environments. The shift aligns with Space Force objectives for diversified and survivable communications pathways. Observers on SpaceX noted the Roman Space Telescope's arrival as the first major science payload confirmed for Falcon Heavy this summer. Commenters highlighted the 70-day processing window and asked whether any last-minute avionics updates would affect the August target. Separate threads discussed how the 2022 geomagnetic storm data is being folded into current Starlink software updates for autonomous drag avoidance. A few users shared photos of the arriving telescope container train at Kennedy. The $4.3 billion observatory completed shipment to Kennedy Space Center and begins roughly 70 days of pre-launch processing. It is manifested on a Falcon Heavy no earlier than August 30th, using the same heavy lift configuration already proven on prior national security missions. The telescope's wide-field infrared instrument will require precise orbit insertion to reach its planned Sun-Earth L2 halo orbit. A Falcon 9 lifted off from Vandenberg carrying 24 satellites and completed its 34th booster landing on the drone ship. The mission continues the West Coast Starlink cadence while the booster fleet accumulates additional flight cycles toward life limit data. Last covered on Episode 10, Falcon reuse cycle tracking now adds one more data point on the path to understanding annual launch rate ceilings. Worth keeping an eye on, SpaceX shares are again under pressure as U.S. markets reopen, with reports citing continued heavy capital needs for Starship and Starlink expansion even after the recent IPO. The stock's post-listing volatility reflects investor debate over the pace at which launch and constellation spending will translate into free cash flow. Any near-term improvement would require either faster Starlink subscriber growth or visible progress on cost per launch metrics. Google News summaries indicated that analysts are watching capital expenditure timelines closely following the June 12th listing. The Counterpoint segment highlighted ongoing investor focus on when Starship and Starlink outlays begin to yield measurable returns. Market observers noted that subscriber metrics and per-flight cost trends remain the primary variables under discussion. On the AI front, no new developments reported today on the Orbital Data Center or XAI compute integration fronts, while watchers continue to track Starlink's direct-to-cell backhaul potential and Colossus cluster utilization. From an engineering standpoint, the 2022 geomagnetic storm episode illustrates how thermospheric density responds to solar input on timescales of hours. Even a modest increase in extreme ultraviolet flux heats the upper atmosphere, raising neutral density at 200 kilometers by tens of percent, and therefore increasing aerodynamic drag on satellites whose ballistic coefficients are already low. Starlink's first-generation satellites, still climbing through that altitude band after deployment, lacked sufficient propellant margin or autonomous compensation to counteract the sudden torque. Subsequent design iterations added both higher insertion orbits and onboard density estimation algorithms that command earlier orbit-raising burns when solar indices exceed thresholds. The same physics now drives decisions on how many spare satellites must ride in each plane and how much margin the next-generation laser-linked birds will carry for station keeping during solar maximum peaks. And a quick market note. SAR checkout is at $185, up 1.8% versus the previous close. Before we go, the Roman Space Telescope's 70-day processing window at Kennedy will be the next visible marker on whether the August 30th Falcon Heavy target holds. And that's a wrap on today's SpaceX developments. SPCX is trading at $185, up 1.8%. Share this with a fellow spaceflight fan if you found it useful, and subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. I'm Patrick in Vancouver. See you next time. And before you go, this show is part of the NARA Network, a family of daily podcasts covering tech, science, markets, and more. If you enjoyed today's episode, give Modern Investing Techniques a listen. Modern Strategies for Canadian and U.S. Investors. You can explore the whole lineup at naranetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.